Back again. Second time this week. Scruff, have you seen DB?
Nope, I have not. He's disappeared.
Disappeared again?
He's off the radar.
So
Completely off the radar.
if he was raking yesterday, what is he doing today?
Oh, that picture was just epic.
I know, right? I think I took it off already, but
I wish you had left it on.
yeah. All right, we should probably get moving.
All right.
And now, on with the show.
Time for bladder check. Check.
Check.
Check. Wait. Screw it. I'm holding it.
Podcasting, the final audio frontier. These are the legends of Brown Squadron.
Our computer is picking up a strange signal. Here, sir, you better take a look at it.
The ongoing mission? To explore the Star Wars universe and other nerd culture topics. To seek new content and new cantinas, bars, and lounges. To boldly annoy Scruffy by making too many bad jokes. Welcome to the Hyperspace Heroes Podcast.
And welcome to Hyperspace Heroes. Scruff, you forgot to tell me to take that off again.
Hey, take that thing off there, will you?
Oh, good. Thanks.
There we go.
Timely, as usual.
Oh, I did figure out where DB is.
Where is he?
He is out looking for his Oreos.
Oh,
His Star Wars special Oreos.
Is he going to double stuff it?
And he's looking for his blue milk to dunk his Oreos in.
Probably. Welcome to Hyperspace Heroes. This is Brown Leader signing in. All wings report in.
Brown 2 signing in.
All right. And as you heard in the opening, Brown 4 DB is not going to be joining us tonight. He's still on special assignment for this week, but we should have him back pretty soon. So yeah, episode 80.
Hopefully with Oreos.
Right. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Episode 89 or 114 on the Spotchka scale. And special author week this week. If you tuned in yesterday, we had a special Wednesday edition with Kelly Knox, and tonight we have another author, and we're going to transcend beyond the Star Wars universe. We'll be talking a little bit about that. There's
beyond?
a word. Yeah, beyond.
Transcend beyond.
Yes.
Did you get your thesaurus out today?
I did. I did my word of the day, and that's what it was. So
nerd word of the day. There you go.
Nerd word of the day. So yeah, we're gonna we've got Bryan Young on the show tonight. We're gonna be bringing him in just a moment. And Bryan had a book drop yesterday called Without Question, and it is part of the Battletech Universe. And we're gonna be talking a little bit, quite a bit about that. We're gonna be talking Star Wars. We're gonna be talking. Bryan is, I should probably just read his bio really quick, and that's going to kind of paint the picture of the things that we might be touching on tonight. So Bryan Young works across many different media. His work as a writer and producer has been called Filmmaking Gold by the New York Times. He's also published comic books with slave labor graphics and Image Comics. He's been a regular contributor for the Huffington Post, StarWars.com, Star Wars Insider Magazine, Sci-Fi, and was the founder and editor-in-chief of the geek news and review site Big Shiny Robot. In 2014, he wrote a critically acclaimed history book. Scruff, you're going to like this. A Children's Illustrated History of Presidential Assassination.
Yes.
And
a copy of that.
He co-authored Robotech, the Macross Saga RPG, has written four other books in the Battletech Universe, Honor's Gauntlet, Fox Tales, Lone Wolf and Fox, and A Question of Survival, which was the book before the one we're talking about tonight. His book, The Big Bang Theory Book of Lists, is a number one bestseller on Amazon. His work has won 2 Diamond Quill Awards, and in 2023, he was named Writer of the Year by the League of Utah Writers. He teaches writing for Writer's Digest, Script Magazine, and at the University of Utah. You can follow him across social media at Swankmatron, or visit his website at swankmatron.com. And I have to ask about that because I have not been able to figure out where the whole Swankmatron thing
I need an answer to that one.
Right. So
it's awesome.
So I think I think we're gonna bring him in.
Bring him in.
Bryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great to have you.
Welcome, welcome. So I kind of went over your bio real quick, but why don't you kind of introduce yourself a little bit to our viewers and our listeners?
I'm Brian. I've done all that stuff. I get really enthusiastically passionate about nerdy stuff and have since I was little. And I really love telling stories, regardless of the medium, whether that's comics or film or journalism or novels and short stories. And I get to do a little bit of it in a lot of different places. And I get to write a lot of other things too that are sort of adjacent to some of the things I love or in the things I love, whether that's Star Wars or Doctor Who or whatever. Mainly Star Wars. Star Wars is where my heart lies.
Right on.
All
And
right.
one of the things that the bio doesn't go over is that Brian is also the co-host of Full of Sith podcast, and they have just recently passed the milestone of 11 years of putting out episodes, over 500 episodes, if I'm not mistaken. Congratulations, Brian.
Yeah, thank you. I just looked on the Libsyn. We've put out 620 episodes over those years.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's crazy. That's
That's
amazing.
awesome.
Yeah, you guys, you and Holly are on my weekly rotation. So when you have episodes drop, they definitely go into my queue to listen to them. So first question we want to get right off the bat is, what does Star Wars mean to you?
Star Wars means a lot to me. Star Wars, when I was a kid, was one of those things that served as an oasis for any trouble I had. It was very soothing to me. One of the key things that Star Wars helped me through, I had a childhood that was not normal, and it was rough in a lot of ways. And I especially had to deal with some issues of abuse on the part of my father. And watching Star Wars and watching Return of the Jedi specifically, where Luke Skywalker gets to take off Darth Vader's helmet and actually see like a person that loves him under there, was something that gave me a lot of hope as a kid. Now, I didn't get to have that moment with my dad, but watching Luke have that moment and get to have that was really powerful to me, even as young as, you know, 3 years old. So Star Wars has always been something very central to my philosophy, the way I think, the lens through which I view the world, which is interesting. For a lot of years on StarWars.com, and we've moved it over to Slash Film. I did a column about the cinema behind Star Wars and the movies that influenced George Lucas and the other filmmakers behind Star Wars, and how they brought those influences into a galaxy far, far away. And it's because I can't watch anything without seeing how Star Wars has used it, or how it's been used by, or how Star Wars has used it, or how it's used Star Wars. It's almost like it's everywhere. And it really is, the lens through which I experience the world. And I'm often just surrounded by Star Wars, whether that's, my oldest son, who's just about to turn 22 next week. His name's Anakin. I've
awesome.
got Star Wars stuff everywhere. And I get to work on Star Wars. I write pretty regular articles at Slash Film, like every week about Star Wars. I'll do special stuff for other websites or Star Wars Insider. And, I get to go do a lot of Star Wars events. I've seen all kinds of really cool Star Wars stuff. And so it's something that informs a lot of what I do. And it actually, I wouldn't be writing Battletech without Star Wars and the people I met through Star Wars, and the people that I met through the people I met through Star Wars. So Star Wars is, I like to think that it's sort of been a catalyst for all the good things that have happened to me in my life, or that I've been able to make happen, with the combination of hard work and sort of being in the right place at the right time. Star Wars has been able to connect me to people, and it's always been a positive source in my life, save for the year of backlash against The Last Jedi. But yeah, no, I think I feel like that answers your question.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I feel like maybe I just rambled for like.
No, it's great.
That was it.
That's
Yeah, I had a question about that. We'll get to that here in a minute. What was your first Star Wars memory?
I'm 2 years old. I'm 2 years and 10 months old. 2 months away from my third birthday. and I'm walking into a movie theater, and I get the impression that this is also my first memory, period.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm walking into a movie theater and thinking that it's very special that we're walking into it instead of driving into it. Because drive-ins were a big thing, and I don't have any memories of drive-ins before then, but I have the memory that I'd had it at some point. And we went in and we watched Return of the Jedi in the evening, and I remember being scared and excited. I remember very specifically Jabba the Hutt. I remember the Ewoks, and I left a changed person. Like, that one screening of Return of the Jedi in 1983 changed my life significantly. After that, I'm not sure where my aunt, the family story went, that my aunt had known a cameraman or something on Return of the Jedi, and so she'd been able to acquire a beta copy of Return of the Jedi like in 84.
Oh,
And
wow.
so we had that, and I wore that tape out. And my next versions of Star Wars for the next couple years were like taped off of like USA and HBO or whatever, so they had commercials and stuff.
Right on.
And then when the the box set finally came out, it was just like I wore those tapes out too. I part of the reason I collect, one of the things I collect is like copies of Star Wars, whether that's VHS or versions of Star Wars or Blu-ray or Laserdisc or DVD or whatever, is just because I think there's some trauma in my system that goes like, well, what if this one breaks? You're gonna need another one. So I've acquired so many copies of those movies, and it doesn't matter how many VHS copies of which version I have. If I'm in a thrift store and there's a copy of the trilogy, or Phantom Menace or whatever, I'm buying it. I think I have like 7 of those Phantom Menace widescreen box sets with the film strips in them, because I bought 2 originally when they came out, and then every time I'm in a thrift store and see one, it's just like, well, that's going home with me. Why? No idea. Well, what if the others break? Like, when was the last time I watched one on VHS? I don't even know, but what if they break?
Right.
It brought a smile to my face because I'm the same way. I don't know why I do it, honestly. I'm not sure, but yeah, I have multiple copies of everything there is. I have the big laser disc, even though I don't have a player for it.
So I've got a
why.
player, and I've got a bunch of different versions. So I've got the original CAV release. I've got the original 1988 collector's box set. I've got the THX release box set. I've got the special edition box set.
Wow.
I've got the individual THX releases, and I have Phantom Menace on Laserdisc, which they only produced in Japan.
Wow.
That was the last one to appear on Laserdisc.
That's impressive. And everybody asks, why do you have all these copies? Why not?
Why not?
Yeah.
Why not? Because
they look nice on the shelf. Well,
it is a cool visual there. We're all lined up. Yeah.
One of the things I loved about Laserdisc in like the 90s, before we really had DVDs, though, is that's where you'd get special features, right? So those Star Wars, that Laserdisc set had the only special features I could find for Star Wars, other than like from Star Wars to Jedi or VHS tapes that I'd have to like buy too much cereal to get, stuff like that. You know what I mean? So like the Laserdiscs were that, and they were the first like audio commentaries I experienced. So I don't know, Laserdisc is just a really great format. I kind of wish they kept selling players and kept making them. I mean, it's kind of a pain to flip them and stuff, but I mean, I still listen to vinyl too. Laserdisc will make its way back.
I'm hoping so, because I have not found one that I was confident enough to buy that I thought was going to work. I found a couple, but they were in really rough shape, and it's like, well, no, that's at the bottom of a box in a dusty, dank basement for too long.
Yeah.
So I haven't quite gotten one yet, but I'll get there someday.
Yeah, that reminds me, when I was in college, I was so late high school and college, I was so into Metallica. I was looking for every bootleg, every Japanese imports on CD, just everything I could find. So yeah, no, Phantom Menace Laserdisc, that's pretty cool. And yeah, I think everything's a circle, right? Everything comes back into fashion. It's vinyl right now, and
when are 8-tracks coming back?
That's what I was gonna ask.
Where's 8-tracks?
Right.
It's weird how VHS is coming back into, you see like this is an unopened copy of Back to the Future from 1986 and it went for auction at like $2,000 and it's like, who's spending money on that? I don't know.
I don't know, but I wish I would have kept some of that stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, when we switched over to DVD, it was like, why would I ever want this again? Except for my Star Wars tapes. And now I'm like, again, every time I go to a thrift store, like I've been slowly piecing together like a brand new Alfred Hitchcock collection. It's like I have all these movies on streaming and Blu-ray, but I need them on VHS for some reason.
Yeah, I know. And that's the part that cracks me up. So I can sit down, get my remote out, hook up, click on Disney Plus, and watch whatever Star Wars I wanted to watch. But yet, I'll still. Oh, I gotta have that VHS tape.
Yeah,
I don't have no idea why.
Well, part of it too, like, it's fascinating going back and watching Phantom Menace on VHS, especially full frame now. I mean, Phantom Menace is 25 years old, and it's interesting to think that its first release was VHS. But there's something, especially if you're watching on an old tube TV, but there's something like very comforting about watching Star Wars in that format because it feels almost more like Star Wars. Like my experience with Star Wars was full frame VHS with commercials for the first 5 years I devoured it. You know what I mean? And then after that, it was still many years before I even got like a widescreen copy. I think my first widescreen copy that I could watch was the THX release in 95, that big flat box. And I've got two of those now because I saw one and had to pick it up. But that was the first time I'd seen it in full frame or in letterbox. But there's something about full frame pan and scan Star Wars at 420 lines of resolution on a tube TV that feels like home. And I think if more people who had struggled with the prequels and the sequels got full frame 420, 420 DP, VHS copies of the prequels and the sequels, I actually think they'd feel like it felt more like Star Wars.
I don't disagree with it. Yeah. Now that makes me want to get some Jiffy Pop, an old CRT TV, plug in the VCR, and I don't think I'm gonna make it to work tomorrow.
Silver from Star Wars Thrifting posted right before Phantom Menace came out in the theaters. She had dug out a copy of it on VHS and had one of the all-in-one VCR TV units and was watching it at home and posted that online. And I was like, "Yep, that's home right there." And Brian, I think you have a point with that because it's, I'm not a high def guy. I can't watch high definition 4K. I'm not. It's just Star Wars instilled a sense of movie magic in me, and I like standard definition. It just feels more comfortable. Scruff, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Did you ever get a Revenge of the Sith VHS copy?
No, I didn't. I think they manufactured them somewhere.
Yep. I think it was overseas somewhere. I'm not sure, but yeah.
Yeah. It's something that's always kind of I've been on the lookout for, and I actually looked into there was someone online who was making VHS copies of the sequel trilogy, but they were really expensive for just a dude in his garage recording them on VHS for himself and printing VHS covers.
Right.
It's one of those things I guarantee at a con like 5 years from now, I'm going to show up at one of those bootlegger tables that are going to come back into fashion, and they're going to have the sequel trilogy there for like $20 on VHS, and I will snag them there. I'm positive of it.
Right.
Absolutely.
So one of the things we wanted, or Scruff, did you have another question before we?
Well, it's just you mentioned that the grumbling about The Last Jedi.
Yeah,
and I did read an article, and I'm just like, you had a very different opinion of that. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I was 100% in agreement. I loved it.
I loved The Last Jedi. I honestly think it's my second favorite Star Wars movie, and it's like the second best Star Wars movie. And being in a space where, like, at that time I was writing pretty regularly for StarWars.com still, I was very public about all the articles I was writing for Slash Film, I was writing for StarWars.com, I was writing for Sci-Fi at that point, and I had gotten a lot of attention for my Twitter thread about Luke Skywalker in that movie, because I think some of the pushback on that movie was people didn't understand Luke Skywalker's character and why he was there and why he was in that place. And I just sort of like explained pretty plainly like why I thought Luke was not only appropriate but like amazing there. And you know, I've literally won awards for writing articles about how there are very few movies that are as well written surrounding the theme of the movie than The Last Jedi is. The Last Jedi is very much predicated on Obi-Wan's line to Luke about how that truth that we cling to is dependent on our own point of view. And if you look at every character and every decision they make and every side character in The Last Jedi, every decision they're making is predicated on the bias of their point of view. That's why you have the Rashomon sequence, that Kurosawa sequence of Luke and Ben in the hut, where you've got Luke's sort of like, I'm covering for myself version. You've got Ben's, this is a horror movie version. And then you've got Luke's sort of like, okay, I'm copying to the truth version. And we're never told which one's exactly the truth, but I think most audiences leaned toward the middle version that Luke gave at the end, especially when you look at like the symbolism of Rey not understanding how Luke could stand over his nephew with a lightsaber with no intention of killing him until she's literally standing over Luke with a lightsaber with no intention of killing him. And it sort of clicks in her head in that way. And so there were some really disingenuous reads of the film that completely believed the bad guy's version of events, who proves to be sort of wrong the entire movie. So why would he be right about that? It was interesting. But yeah, no, like I just sort of got, by getting so much attention on Twitter threads about it, I just got a lot of pushback about it. It was interesting to learn later that literally a full like 50% of the complaining about that movie online was literally Russian bots. There was a study out of one of the California colleges that found that literally half of the grumbling about that movie was, Russian bots. And then as soon as The Last Jedi didn't have the currency to stoke things as much as it had, they moved on to the next thing.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay,
that is interesting.
Because I loved it. I didn't think it was that bad. I mean, I can always nitpick something, but I really enjoyed it.
There's things that I think like really hardcore Star Wars fans forget, and it's something I have to remind myself of every day, is that like, yes, the vast majority of people really loved The Last Jedi, and there is a small sliver of hardcore Star Wars fans that are like, this is not for me. We're the majority. We are those people. But like, they need to understand. And I have to remind myself that I am not in the majority of Star Wars fans by any stretch of the imagination. The majority of Star Wars fans don't read the books. They might watch some of the shows. They'll see the movie once in the theater. They'll probably maybe see it twice. They'll probably buy it on video or DVD or home, physical media. And they might watch it once every few years. And that's like the vast majority of Star Wars fans, right? Like probably 95% of Star Wars fans fall into that category. And then you've got, the next smallest category. The next smallest category is like the folks who watch the TV shows and the animated series. And then a smaller slice of that are the people who read the books. And then a smaller slice of that are the people who read the comics. And, the video games sort of has a different little Venn diagram over here where there's crossover with the more casual fans and crossover with the hardcore fans. But that group that consumes all that extra media is just a sliver of who Star Wars fans are. And it's hard to remember that when we're talking online or on our podcasts or, on stage at conferences and conventions and stuff, that this isn't how everybody consumes Star Wars, because most people just enjoy it. And you can't make $1 billion at the box office on the backs of just the hardcore fans. We're just not the core audience. We're the core audience that they, will cater to in ways to make sure that we have those products, because they can still, even a fraction of Star Wars' audience is large enough for them to justify writing all those books and those comics and those TV shows and stuff. But it's just not as big on a scale with the movies, because Star Wars is a cultural force larger than all of that, in a way that it's almost hard to fathom.
Yeah, for sure. And I think even the smallest sliver of them all are the podcasters.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Those of us online talking about it every week.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I hadn't really thought about it from the different perspectives angle. And and I think a lot of people, like you said, are just, they watch what they watch, and they've all kind of maybe looked at it from a single perspective all along. So that's, I'll have to rewatch those in that kind of frame of mind. So one of the things we brought you on for, Bryan, is you had a brand new book drop yesterday.
Yeah.
In the Battletech universe, called Without Question. And there it is on the screen. For our audio listeners, definitely swing over to Amazon, just type in Bryan Young and you'll see the book. You can also hit him up at swankmatron.com. But give us, for the non-Battletech listeners and viewers, can you kind of give us a little synopsis on what is Battletech?
So Battletech is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. Battletech started life as actually there is a Star Wars tie in that Battletech started actually as Battle Droids, as a game, a tabletop game where you play giant mechs that were originally surplus from the Macross saga and whatever those companies had. That's just a tabletop game where you shoot each other with stompy robots. Lucasfilm said, hey, you can't do that, and sent them a cease and desist. And so they changed the name to Battletech very quickly. And then Harmony Gold said, listen, we know you licensed all of these mecha from the Japanese company, but we actually have the exclusive right to market these in the US, so you can't resell these things anymore. So they had to go back to the drawing board and design their own mechs. And Battletech was born that way. Very quickly, they started a fiction series. One of their first writers was Mike Stackpole, who, if you were familiar with the X-Wing saga and I, Jedi, he's written by far and away the vast majority of that universe. And it's sort of like, people describe it as Game of Thrones in space. It's got all of the political house intrigue on a top level in a universe that spans thousands of worlds across what they call the galaxy, in Battletech is the inner sphere. And they fight their wars with these battle mechs. It takes place in the, the stories tend to get told from about the year 3020. And this book that just came out happens in the year 3152. So the narrative stretches 150 years close to over the 120 novels or whatever it is that have come out in those 40 years. A lot of people would recognize it as Mech Warrior. So the Mech Warrior video games are all part of the Battletech universe. And they all usually take cues from the events in the fiction. And it's having a new renaissance. The rules haven't really changed over the last 40 years. There have been updates to the rules in small ways, more like errata, but all of your stuff from 40 years ago is still just as playable and valid on the tabletop as anything you could buy tomorrow. And the books are those human stories that help you relate to the tabletop game. That's, like I said, where Mike Stackpole got his start. It was actually his work and the strength of his work in Battletech that got him the X-Wing books. And it was actually Mike's recommendation that got me into writing Battletech. And now he and I are collaborating on a bunch of stuff. Does that explain the universe well enough?
Kind of, sort of, yeah. And I think one of the other things too is, whereas a lot of our listeners of yours are used to a galaxy far, far away where everything is different and alien, Earth exists in this universe, in this hemisphere. It's kind of and it's all about mankind's expansion out from Earth. So you have a lot of they're talking about whiskey, they're talking about they're Irish and Italian and different religions, and House of Kurita was very Japanese influenced with samurai, and so it was about man's existence in the year 30 50 and so on.
It's very much 1,000 years of future history into a setting where entropy sort of come back into the universe, and we've sort of lost some of the technology that we've had because of the wars that we've had. And it's a really fun universe to work in.
Mhm.
And I'm really grateful that I'm able to work in it, and I have a lot of fun in it. My first experience with Battletech was I want to say like 93.
Mhm.
So it's been at least in the background in my life for, well, geez, I guess like 30 plus years now. And it's been really fun to be a part of it over the last 5 in a professional capacity.
Yeah. I played back in the day. I played back in like 90, around, it was probably like 90, 91, 92. And I was reading Stackpole's novels back then. And he really did build the definitive universe of what is the Battletech, universe in novels. And I think then of course, I went on to college and life and everything. And like a lot of us, we, we're busy with families and all that. And I think I stopped. I think the clans were just invading when I stopped reading. So it was kind of cool to, I've been following you on social for a while and noticed that you were writing it. And I had tweeted at you one time and I was like, man, you're making me want to pick up a book. And you're like, well, you could just read mine. And I started reading, and that's how we started talking. And I've read all your stuff that you've done for Battletech. And it's been very cool to kind of catch up where the universe is at this point. And it's very cool to see that you're carrying on the tradition that's been kind of established and built into this universe. One of the things that I noticed, like this, the latest book is, without question, it's a continuation of a story in universe that you've been writing, focused around a group called the Jade Falcons. For those Battletech listeners, they know all about Clan Jade Falcon. But you've also been writing a separate shorter stories about Fox Patrol, which I've really enjoyed. And one of the questions I wanted to ask was, is there a difference? And I'm assuming here that when you're writing the Jade Falcon stories, because it's kind of the main storyline of the universe, do you have certain guidelines that you're given? Here's where we want the story to go. And then versus Fox Patrol, where do you have like complete creative control over what you're doing with Fox Patrol?
Yeah, so with the big main book stuff, there's sort of a Bible that the developers, the line developers, that's sort of the head honchos in Battletech, that they have like a story Bible of where they want the story to go. And when A Question of Survival, the book preceding this, came out, I had not been involved in that process. But last year in January, myself, Mike, a number of the other creatives involved, we got together to sort of chart out those next few years and really collaborate on what those things are. But as we agreed on what that shape of the forward momentum of the universe was like, I do have to kind of sit in those guardrails, especially with a faction that is as popular and long living as the Jade Falcons, right? They're one of the more popular factions in the universe. That would be like, the Star Wars equivalent of that would be like me coming in and writing the rebirth of the Mandalorians, right? Mm-hmm. They're sort of that central and important to the universe. And the Fox Patrol, they're much smaller stakes. They don't change the face of the universe. They don't really affect much but each other. And so as long as I'm coloring inside the lines of what's established in the universe already, I kind of get to do whatever I want with the Fox Patrol. The Fox Patrol is a mercenary unit. Battletech kind of has 3 distinct sorts of factions. There's the militaries, like the house militaries. So you've got, think of samurai to a daimyo, right? Like they're house troops. And then you've got mercenaries that get hired by all of these different factions. And Katie Ferraro and the Fox Patrol are a very small found family of a very tiny mercenary unit that probably couldn't affect much world to world. And then you've got the clans, which the Jade Falcons are a part of. and they are sort of these hellbent conquerors trying to take Terra in an effort to protect humanity from who it's still unclear, because it seems like they're the ones who we need to protect humanity from the clans, not the other way around. But yeah, those mercenary units that are very small, like the Fox Patrol, those first 5 stories that you read in that Fox Tales book, I had no oversight whatsoever. I just sent them all in, and fact check said, yeah, this all works. We're good to go. But with the novels, I have to go through outline approval and, just sort of the standard licensed world business that you'd get for work for hire like this in someone else's universe.
Right. Yeah, I was wondering about that. One of the things, and spoiler alerts, we may talk about the latest novel. It did just drop yesterday. Make sure you head over to swankmatron.com, Amazon, wherever you buy your books. Make sure you can also get autographed copies, right, on your site.
Yeah, on my website. Yeah.
Yep. And one of the things I found really kind of interesting was back when I stopped reading and the clans were invading, and of course, who wasn't Clan Wolf back then, because that was, it was almost like Filoni and everything he does, right?
Mike really liked wolves, and
yeah,
that was really where that came from.
Right. And so who didn't buy into supporting? And then with was it Kai Allard Lau or something, and didn't he tie in or something with? But anyway, it was you touched on it just a moment ago, which was the clans coming in, this invading force, saying they're on this mission to protect humanity. And it wasn't until actually this latest book that it really kind of finally started to define some things for me in terms of what the clans really should be doing, because you see that shift in the Jade Falcons with the new Khan, and what they're the direction he's taking the Jade Falcons. And thank you, Baldo. Glad you joined us tonight. They were this conquering the barbarians. They were the hordes coming in, right? But with more advanced technology, and a lot of them. And when I forget which characters talked about it, but I think it was when they were reflecting on what the new Khan was doing. And by the way, how do you pronounce his name? Because
I pronounce it G Chistu, but he was a character that was handed to me that had already existed when WizKids had the license, and they had that Clicks Mech Warrior game. He's a character that was created then. So
okay,
G Chistu is how I say it in my head, because that's sort of phonetically what it is. But someone else could correct me, because I didn't create him. I'm the only person who's written him in prose, but I didn't create him.
Right. And the viewpoint, or displaying the viewpoint that everybody has the Jade Falcons because of the Mongol doctrine and everything, and how they treated their subjects, and then seeing the new direction. And it's like, no, their original mission was to come back in and save humanity. So why are you going to rule over them with an iron fist if your point is to save humanity, save them from themselves? And it after all these years, 30 plus years later, I was like, oh, that's making sense. And I love how you're showing how a society can change, and it takes brave people to step up and take charge, and they'll be challenged over and over and over and over again, as we see in the new book. Because it was just even right up to the very end, it was just stand up, get knocked down, stand up, get knocked down in the books. But what was your is this kind of the end of the Jade Falcon story, or are we gonna kind of?
No, there'll be more. I mean, we've plotted out quite a bit of story around this area of space and in the whole inner sphere, to be honest, for the next few years. There are definitely more things for them to do. The thing about the Jade Falcons is, you talked about how you kind of tuned out when the clans had started to invade. And the clans have sort of been the heel in the universe for the longest time. And the Jade Falcons were sort of the worst of the worst. Mm-hmm. They were the most brutal, the most conquering, and they've got sort of 100 years of blood on their hands. And all of the ones who believed that all that blood was a good thing are dead, and so you've got all the remnants that are left that no one thought was good enough to bring to the big final glorious battle, are going like, okay, how do we not make that mistake again?
Right.
And so there's definitely more story to be told about them. I mean, the Jade Falcons have been central in the novels. You know, like I said, there's 120 novels, and they've been central characters in most of them, or a lot of them, since the clans had entered their invasion, which was actually pretty early on. And again, those were books that Mike Stackpole wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we'll see more of this story play out, because there's so much more in this area of space that it's sort of like World War I before World War I. You know what I mean? It's about, it's Eastern Europe in like 1910, as everything's kind of getting ready to start on fire.
Right. So one of the things that I've enjoyed, and I was really mad at you in the last book at first, and I'll say I was really mad because one of the things that you do, and you did it again in this book, was you give enough backstory to both sides, because, you know, obviously this is a book about conflict, or these are books about conflict, two sides fighting each other, but you give enough backstory on each side that, like in the last book, when it was the Ghost Bears and the Jade Falcons, and I'm like, I didn't know who I wanted to win, because I was empathetic equally to both sides. And I was like, I didn't want I didn't want the battle to end, because I didn't want there to be a winner, because I didn't want the other side to lose. And and then you kind of did the same thing in this book with the mercenary group, the Tomcats, which very cool name, by the way, because back in the day, the F-14 Tomcat was my favorite jet. And we also know it was used for things like the Phoenix and stuff like that. But same thing in this one. I was kind of like, I was feeling bad for the Tomcats, because I'm like, I think I know where the story's going. I think I know who's going to win, but I didn't want them to lose, you know? And it was just, it's a fun, frustrating feeling to have.
Yeah, no, my editor, the first time he read that, he sent me a message immediately as they were heading into that final battle with the Tomcats. And he's like, I'm going to be very upset if the Tomcats get annihilated here, because they're so fun. I want more stories from them. So
yeah,
I was like, that's purely accidental. Like, I created them just for this story, but if people want more stories with them, I'll do it. But I'm a big fan in that, like, no one's really a good guy and no one's really a bad guy. It's all a matter of perspective and point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And people can oppose each other and not hate each other. You know what I mean? People can just say, like, this is my objective. You're standing in the way of my objective. I don't have anything personal against you, but I have to go through you. Sorry. And I think it makes more compelling stories when you're sort of on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, like that was very much how the first book was written, because I personally, as a writer, had to identify with the main character from the Ghost Bears as equally as the main character from the Jade Falcons.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it was a really exciting moment when I got to sort of point that immovable, or that unstoppable force against that other immovable object. And, you know, I remember talking with my editor quite a bit, actually, about how to actually end the battle and whose perspective it should be from, because we didn't know, like, if because one of them has to lose, do I write that from the loser's perspective and it ends on a down note for the reader, or do I write it on an up note from the winner's perspective and leave that for an up note for the reader, and managing the reader experience to feel good about that, even though they might have been rooting for the other party, was a really delicate balancing act. And that was the same thing with the Tomcats, right? It was just like, I didn't want anybody who was instantly a fan of either party to feel like they didn't give it their all, or that I'd given either of them short shrift, and that the final disposition of the battle was satisfying to both parties in some way.
Yeah, it's and it's also a really good way of now having those threads out there to pick up on, you know, whether it's you or other writers, to really, because you've created, like, now the Ghost Bears, what's going to happen? You know, it's like they are at a low point, as a society, and with the Dominion, I want to see where they go. I want to see them, but I want to see them succeed too. I want to see them climb out of that and move forward. And oh, cool. 7 chapters into the book, really liking the Falcons are evolving and going in a more positive direction. This makes them really stand out from other clans.
Yeah, when the clans started, they were all sort of just I'm Clan A and I wear a wolf, and I'm Clan B and I wear a Jade Falcon, and they've slowly built their own identities. But the Jade Falcons never really, until this point, shook out of that just mustache twirling.
Yeah.
And so this is, I'm hearing from a lot of people. My favorite message that I get a lot, actually, since A Question of Survival came out, is that people will send me expletives and say, "I hate you. I'm a Jade Falcon fan now."
Right. Well, and that's because like I said, I was Clan Wolf in the early days, because who wasn't Clan Wolf?
Yeah.
They were kind of the best of the bad guys, right? The cool of the bad guys, and things were a little more monolithic back then with the clans, like you said. And when I was going to start the other book, I was like, Jade Falcons, do I really want to read about the Jade Falcons? I mean, it's not Clan Wolf, but all right, I'll give it a try. I had read some of your other stuff, so I was like, I'll give it a try, and I'm glad I did, because like you said, and there were little details like the fact that they have no culture, they have no artistry, no human culture kind of thing, the scene at the opera house, and the things like that, and how alien it is, because they had bought into the Mongol doctrine so much, and it was nothing about warfare.
Yeah.
But then it begs the question is, okay, if you're all about that, what are you going to do when you get there? So if you get to the finish line and you win, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
You're not just going to decimate humanity and you got nowhere else to go. You got to start something.
Yeah. No, the problem is the Jade Falcons have one marketable skill, and it's not like a happy one.
Right. So yeah, it's lots of I've enjoyed a lot of the details you put in there, a lot of things like that. It's definitely, and like I said, to watch them transform, and like our last commenter just said, to watch them transform from what they were to what they're becoming. And I've enjoyed you've been tying in. There was was it Honor's Gauntlet, I think, where you brought in what's her name, Malva,
Nikita Malthus.
Nikita Malthus, and I was like, that's a cool tie-in. But I also want to know what happened to what was the character in
Archer
that?
Pride.
Yes, I want to know what happened to Archer Pride.
He's still stuck on Terra.
Oh, okay, there's a story right there.
Yeah,
right
no, I've got some plans for how that story might come to fruition based on where he's at now, and hopefully I'll get a chance to tell that story. But I've already got my next book. I've got a book coming out in the first quarter of next year in the Battletech universe that's very much a spy thriller.
Okay, is that Voidbreaker?
That's Voidbreaker, yeah.
Voidbreaker.
And then I've got the graphic novels, and on top of those, I've got 2 more books that I'm writing. I'm just about to embark writing on now, that'll come out next year, the year after. One of them is a Fox Patrol book.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so they'll get a full-length book that happens after the events of Without Question, because they got a little cameo in Without Question. And then the other one is with another mercenary unit I created called the Ghost Dogs, which were this splinter group of the Kellhounds, which is sort of Mike Stackpole's baby as far as a mercenary group. So we'll get some of that, and it'll be a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So I want to, you talked about, you're about to embark on writing some new books, and I that's a good segue, because I'm always curious with our writers and other creators, what is your creation process in terms of, like I've read the one thing I've heard from a lot of people that write is there's different types of writing styles. Either you sit around and wait for that inspiration to strike, or you force yourself to write every day, whether it's good or bad. What is your process for writing?
So I write every day. I'm an everyday writer. I think today this is actually my wife's desk. So my notebook is on my desk in the other room. She just happened to keep all my Star Wars toys, so I use this as the background. But it was I think today's 3,230 something days in a row I haven't missed of writing, and that counts days on vacation or times I've been in the hospital or surgeries or dental work or COVID once. Writing every day. I feel I'm the sort of writer who just needs to keep that momentum, or I feel like I'm going to rust that skill. But as far as my writing process, as I'm about to start one of these books, when I'm writing a book for myself, I'll start just by getting a legal pad and making notes and telling myself the story in whatever chunks that feel cool. Right? Like what excites me about the story, how I want it to be shaped. And then eventually that'll sort of turn into an outline with a rough order of events. And then I'll turn that into a synopsis. And that synopsis will sort of be my guiding document. And I'll sit down and just write the story 2,000 words a day minimum until it's done. With these Battletech books, really it's having to go through that process first and then get that first synopsis approved. And that'll go through some notes and some feedback from the people who own Battletech. And then we'll sort of negotiate that. And then they'll send me a contract at that point. And as soon as I get the contract, I usually start writing. And about, 4 to 6 weeks later, we'll have that book done.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's writing every day makes it, if I'm writing 2,000 words a day on a book like that, it makes it pretty easy. And my physical process, I have a free write, which is a digital typewriter. And I'll do my new words on that, send it to myself, add it to the document. And then the next morning I'll start my work by editing yesterday's work, formatting it, making it look nice in the document. Then when I get to the end, I go back to the digital typewriter. Because there's no internet and there's no Twitter on that digital typewriter. So
no distractions.
No distractions.
Right.
And that's I do the same thing with short stories. Short stories, I don't use the digital typewriter though. I use an actual electric typewriter. Especially since my phone now, if I just aim my camera at the pages that I spit out of the typewriter, I can just copy and paste it into an email. And then have a physical copy of my first draft to go over and revise and polish and stuff. And part of the reason I haven't started that Fox Patrol novel yet is just because I've been doing so many short stories. I've been invited to do a ton of short stories for Battletech and Shadowrun and some other properties. And I've literally just been working on short stories nonstop for the short stories and like novellas for the last 2 months.
Right.
And I'm working on a set of Star Wars cards now too. So as though I didn't have enough on my plate.
Right.
I love doing those.
So quick question for the collectors out there.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that question in just a second, Scruff. So something you just said. Now, do you save the typed pages? Because I can just see collectors' mouths watering right now in 5-10 years wondering, I got a Bryan Young manuscript for such and such a book, because I could see those going up in value at some point.
Part of the reason I started doing that was that I really like the typewriters. I've been a typewriter writer since I was typewriters were out of fashion when I was in high school, but there was something really alluring about it and making me feel like it was really easy to get into that process. But I had gone to a number of events where they were asking writers for stuff that like conferences. Most conferences I go to seem to be either a nonprofit organization or linked to a nonprofit organization. And they're like, hey, do you have some books that you could raffle off? And I realized that if I had original pages from my typewriter, of a story that I'd already digitized and turned in, that could fetch some at those. Or maybe if I get hard up for cash, I can toss them on eBay or something. But
right.
if not, when I die, my wife will hand them off to a college or something. But they'll be there, right? It's a little harder to do that with your, it's a little harder to do that with digital documents.
Right.
But, one of my favorite souvenirs I've ever bought at a con, I had a table right across the way from one of the writers of the Masters of the Universe cartoon from the 80s.
Oh, wow.
And the thing he sold on his table was just, he would give free autographs, but the thing that you could buy to get autographed were just photocopies of his original typewritten scripts of He-Man. And I bought a bunch of those, and it was just fascinating to go through and see that process that way. And I was like, you know what? Maybe 20 years from now, I could just be selling photocopies of my stories you've already bought. Who knows? But as a writer, that was like my first year of doing cons as a writer, and it was really inspiring to buy something like that, and now maybe I'll have something like that for another writer that might get inspired. Who knows? I don't.
Right on. Scruff, can you put that question back
there
up?
it is.
So from KV ASAC 123, who is your favorite character to write in without question that is not Katie Ferraro? And will you be covering Falcons on Terra?
So my favorite character to write, they're all, I mean, part of the reason I was so excited to write this book is because they're all a lot of fun. G is sort of like this used car salesman of a warrior. And he's a lot of fun, but like you talked about the Tomcats sort of stealing the show a little bit, but Enrique, the commander of the Tomcats, was really fun to write. But I actually think the most fun, well, I don't know, Nikita Malthus was really fun because she was just so over the top, but like not out of bounds for what these characters are like. But I think Bugsy Heidegger, who's the head of the Lone Wolves, he was so fun to write because he speaks in Malaphors, right? Like he messes up idioms all the time. And so just coming up with the way he talks was just so fun. Malaphors, for anybody not familiar with the term, it's kind of like what Biff Tannen does in Back to the Future, which is like make like a tree and get out of here. So he just mangles the pun of whatever idiom that he's doing, and Bugsy will mix some, so he'll be like, you know what, we're gonna burn that bridge when we come to it. It's like, that's not how that phrase goes, and that means something totally different. But it is fun to see you do that, and he's just he was just a really fun character to write from his point of view through the course of the book, at least the part that he appeared in. And he was also a main character in the Fox Patrol serial novel that I'd written, and he was really fun to write there too. And I'm kind of sad that at this point I don't have any plans to write him more, but if I can find a place to do it, I'm going to, because he was just so fun.
Yeah, so touching on the Lone Wolves, I thought so that was an interesting concept, because back when I played, you had merc units, but they were all big merc units, Wolf's Dragoons and Hellhounds, and it was these big, and that's another reason I like the Fox Patrols, because it's this scrappy little group that's trying to build something for themselves. But the whole concept of the Lone Wolves, of all these individual small time merc units coming together in one larger, where did that concept come from?
So that was something that's been in the universe for a long time, apparently, but they haven't gotten any screen time. They were in source books. They were always sort of mentioned in the background as the Lone Wolves is this co-op of a whole bunch of little merc units that weren't large enough to get any of the big choice jobs, right? That are going to pay them a lot of money. And so the way that worked is something that's been in the canon for many, many years. And, the line developer suggested to me, he's like, what plans do you have for the Fox Patrol in the future? And I was like, I've got them to this point where they're ready at the edge of the Ill-Clan era. And I could do just about anything with them. What are you thinking? And he said, look into the Lone Wolves and see if you think that they would fit there. And I started doing research about the Lone Wolves and the way they worked, and the personality, like Bugsy again was a character who had been created previously. And that was something that they had in a couple of their source books about who he was and generally how they operated. And so I was able to imbue him as a character. And so really it was the really great groundwork that having a universe as old as this, it was just a great advantage, and to be able to step into it and use it in a way that made a lot of sense for the characters in the story. It just felt like a very natural fit.
Oh, that's cool. That's very cool. Yeah, no, I love the concept. And there was another part to that question, Scruffy, that you had up there, which was, are you going to be writing about any of the Falcons on Terra?
I would love to. I've got some ideas. I've got some plans. But we're going to have to see where the narrative winds take me.
Right.
I would love to. I really want to see what happens when the Falcons that were sort of not killed on Terra end up meeting G and his Falcons in their former enclave, and because they elected their own Khan as well, and they have their own command structure that thinks they're the top and the only Jade Falcons there are, and they're both like, we're the real Jade Falcons, but they don't really know about each other. So it's going to cause some interesting fireworks when those two factions finally meet, and I'm really excited and interested to write that, and we'll see if that gets to happen.
No, that'd be very cool. Yeah, there's been enough, like I said, threads out there now that you've got dozens of stories you could build off easy, dozens and dozens of stories. So no, very cool. So yeah, Battletech. Obviously, if anybody in the chat has any more questions, by all means, throw those out. But I can see the glazed look in Scruffy's eyes.
It sounds very interesting. I've never read a Battletech book. I've never played the game, but I think I need to dive in a little bit.
It's a good. I'll definitely send you a list of books. But has there been other authors in the current era writing about Jade Falcons? So you've made some references to stuff going on, but like my exposure to the Jade Falcons has only been what you've been writing lately. So
there was one book that sort of kicked off the Ill Clan era that was sort of where they got annihilated by Clan Wolf, called Hour of the Wolf.
Okay.
But other than that, I'm the only one who's been writing Jade Falcons for the last 5 years or so.
Okay.
So that's pretty. It's pretty much just me at the moment.
Okay. From another question, Stephanie was a cool written character, very honorable and quite opposite of Malvina.
Yeah, so Stephanie also Chistu, because the clans are eugenicists and they all use the same bloodlines, and so they all have very similar blood names, and only like 20 warriors are allowed to have a specific blood name, and Stephanie and GE both have the same blood name. But Stephanie was elected the Khan of the Jade Falcons that were left behind, and yes, she was very much an iconoclast in the previous Khan's sort of brutal regime, and she'd always tried to sort of obliquely oppose her. And but she's very much the sort who she's bending the knee to Clan Wolf and their claim to be the clan of all clans. And she's going to have a very interesting time, I think.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
So moving on, staying in the Battletech universe a little bit though, but you've got an upcoming project with Mike and some graphic novels. Is there anything you can kind of touch on with those?
So Mike Stackpole and I are working on a series of 4 88-page graphic novels that are going to introduce readers to the Battletech universe in the current era. They're really designed to give everybody a taste of sort of what Battletech is all about, visually and story-wise, and they're designed to be an entry into the universe for anybody. They take place. They're going to start in 3151, I think, which is the year there, and it's going to be very mercenary heavy. There will be a lot of different mercenary units represented. And I'm trying to think of what else I'm allowed to say about it. It's like Star Wars stuff all over again.
Right.
We're gonna have some guest writers take on in the first issue. We've got a few guest writers that hopefully Star Wars fans might recognize, to write some interstitial material around some of the stuff that Mike and I have planned. The artist is a longtime Battletech artist named Eldon Cowger, and his stuff is just really terrific. And he has been working with Battletech for years. He does a lot of the cover art and things, and he has a really great handle on the battle mechs, which are something that it's interesting in that they have them all digitized and 3D modeled because they're making the plastic figures. So he's actually, as an artist, going to be able to use those to position those in the storytelling in the comics, and then color over them traditionally. We're hard at work on it. I would love to see the first one out before the end of the year. I don't know if that's going to happen, but we're working as fast and as hard as we can on them. So they will be seen sooner than later. and I'm really excited about them. There's going to be a lot of cameos and Easter eggs, and longtime BattleTech fans are going to see a lot of really cool stuff that might fly over the heads of some of the new readers, but it's not going to detract from any of the enjoyment of any of the new readers.
Right. Is there a title for the series yet, or
not yet?
Okay.
I think we'll probably get there soon. Right now it's just everybody's referring to it as the BattleTech graphic novel project.
Right.
So
okay. All right, fair enough. It's Scruffy. When those come out, I'm gonna have you on the lookout when you make your weekly comic runs and pick those up for me.
Absolutely.
For sure. Very cool. So I wanted to just throw a couple things up on the screen really quick for our viewers. These are some of the other things that Bryan has worked on. Obviously, The Voidbreaker, which we don't have a title for yet, without question, which is the new novel. Fox Tales, which I've got a copy of that. I've read a lot of them. Honor's Gauntlet, which we kind of touched on in A Question Survival. But you've also been doing some work in the Robotech universe.
Yeah.
But I know Scruffy probably has some questions about the Big Bang Theory book because I know he's got a copy of it. And Scruff.
Absolutely. So what prompted you to write that book, the Big Bang Theory book of lists?
My agent called and the publisher said, "We think Bryan would be good for this. Could we talk about how to do that?" And it was literally the publisher, which is Running Press, and they do a lot of these sort of pop culture coffee table books. The editor had worked with some mutual friends and things like that, and they'd seen my social media and knew that I probably had the background in nerdery to be able to pick up all of the, inside jokes and things like that I could be able to actually track this stuff in the Big Bang Theory. And so they thought I was a really good fit for that. And they called my agent and said, "Do you think you'd like to work on it?" And we negotiated what it was going to entail and how long it would be. It wasn't long enough, but and as soon as I signed the contract, I got to work on it, and it was a lot of fun, and it's been doing really well. I think people have enjoyed it. I think I was able to add some interesting things and catalog some interesting things, or at least things that I found interesting in the storytelling in the Big Bang Theory. And it was, I will tell you, I had, from the signing of the contract to the time I had to turn in my draft and having to watch every episode to catalog everything, 32 days.
You did that in 32 days.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So that was a full-time job in and of itself.
Yeah,
right there.
that was a full-time job for 32 days. And then, that was to get the first draft. And obviously I did a lot of work with revisions and edits and going through Warner Brothers as far as their approvals were concerned. And then going through with the graphic designer and coming up with ideas for how they might visually depict things that I'd done. And some of the ideas that I had, I thought would have been funnier if they would have let me go in a different direction. Like, one of the things I fought the hardest for was there's an episode of Big Bang Theory where Sheldon gets a cat named Zazzles.
Yep.
He gets a whole bunch of cats, and they're all named after famous physicists, except for Zazzles because he's so zazzy. And my idea for the spread was that I was going to do all these really serious biographies of the physicists with pictures of the cats. And then Zazzles was going to be sort of a joke thing. And that made it in there, but they didn't want us to use the pictures of the physicists or the cats. Like, it was just a big, like, they wanted to cut it completely. And I'm like, this is really, like, I feel like this is the funniest one here.
Absolutely.
And they were like, nope. And there were some other things too. Like, I asked, I cataloged the entirety of every clause in, like, the roommate agreement. And I was like, could I write around this so it's actually a complete contract? And Warner Brothers was like, absolutely not. So, things like that. I tried to stretch it where I could to make it even more. But I didn't always get to do that, but the times I did get to do, I think it made a much more fun book.
Absolutely. So, you said you had to watch every episode. Of course, did you have to rewatch them over and over again?
With 32 days and 8 seasons of that show, I think it's
Probably
more
not.
than 8. It's like 11, isn't it? It's a lot of seasons.
But, yeah.
I had an opportunity to watch every episode once in that 32 days because I was cataloging everything from Howard's belt buckles to Sheldon's t-shirts, to celebrity guest stars and movie references and board games they were playing and all kinds of, like fun with flags episodes and all that stuff. And it was such an intense process compressed into such a small space of time that I was literally writing the book as I was watching the episodes, because I was taking notes about, like, okay, there's a shirt. I might pause it for a second to take some notes. And I had to meticulously catalog which episode I was on, because I had to do timelines for all the characters. So basically I just worked on one huge document as I was watching each episode. And then afterward, in that last few days before I had to turn it in, is when I started organizing it into the table of contents and the individual lists, kind of like you see them laid out in the book. But all of the content was there, and I'd been building it from day one. And there were definitely some things that surprised me. Like, I kind of thought intuitively watching the show that Sheldon's favorite superhero character would have been the Flash. Right? Just, you see a lot of Flash shirts on him. But as I was cataloging the shirts, I realized that the shirt he wears with the double helix on it is actually Kryptonian DNA. So that's a Superman shirt. So all of a sudden it skewed the results. So I had to redo the chart, like, right at the end when I realized that. And it was interesting too. Like, it was one of those things that, like, Warner Brothers owns DC. So there were definitely lists that got reduced in ways that, or changed or cut completely. Like, there was a list where they all talk about their favorite X-Men. And I went through and wrote really detailed bios of all the X-Men, and then made assumptions about why they might be their favorites. And they're like, those are Disney characters. Like, we're not going to do that. Like, stick to the DC ones because we own them and we don't want to have to hassle with that. things like that. Right. So the DC stuff got leaned on, which is why you see, like, very rarely Sheldon wearing a shirt that's not very seldom wearing a nerdy shirt that's not DC based, just because Warner Brothers, who produced the show, owns DC.
Right.
Yeah, that was the show itself has just got a lot of detail to it, and it's one of the reasons why I like it so much. And my wife's almost sick of watching it, because every time I go to sit down on the couch, that's what I turn on, because it's kind of that comfort show for me. Outside of Star Wars, that's probably the thing I watch the most, and there's just a lot of deep detail there that even after seeing it as many times as I have, I'll catch little details like the double helix shirt you talked about there. Just miscellaneous stuff like that. Yeah. So that must have been an impressive feat to do in 32 days.
It was, my brain was feeling very melty at that point at the end. But I mean, it feels like, from your perspective as a huge fan of the show, hopefully the book added something for you.
Absolutely. It brought some of those details together that you haven't seen it as many times as I have. I didn't really link.
Yeah, no, it was funny realizing that the costume designers on the show are actually really in tune with the writers, where, and I think I did a list about this in the book, where there are Sheldon episodes where he'll wear shirts based on the different Green Lantern rings of power, and each different Green Lantern color, like, has a different sort of emotion that it feeds on. So, like, there was an episode where Sheldon was being very greedy and he was wearing an Orange Lantern t-shirt, which is avarice. And so it was like they were actually tying some of that DC lore into Sheldon's costumes, how he was acting in individual episodes and stuff. And it was like, those things were really clever. And I guess, the editor was right that, like, they picked the right person to go, like, oh, you've got this wide swath of nerd knowledge. You're going to be able to pick up on that stuff and bring it in here.
See, and that was stuff that I never made a connection before. I mean, I know DC. I like DC. I've watched, the DC, but not to that depth. And you brought that depth to it. That's why I was able to make connections that I never realized before.
Oh, that's great to hear. That's great to hear.
Yeah. So the book is just awesome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It was a lot of fun, but it's like I feel bad because so much of it was in short-term memory. So it's like I probably don't remember writing half of that book because it was just so in such a compressed timeline.
Right.
Yeah, you cranked it out in such
Yeah.
a short period of time that there's no way you could have put that much into a brain and maintained and kept it there.
Yeah.
So definitely some confirmation from some of our viewers as well. Thanks, Ubaldi. Other questions, Scruff, before we move on to another thing.
No, I'm ready to move on to Lost at the Con.
We'll get there in a second. But Max Rebo joined us in the chat, and I want to say hi to Max Rebo especially. One of our friends of our show from a certain point of Skew, they run contests every time they're a Star Wars centric show. Every new season that they're doing reviews on, they do giveaways, and they just announced the winners of their giveaway. They got their hands on some original action figures, a Prune Face, a Darth Sidious, and Max. I think between Max and I, we had about a quarter of the entries for that drawing, and Max was able to come in first and win that Prune Face and the Emperor. Not Darth Sidious, but the Emperor. And so congratulations, Max. But just remember that I won first. So and
you just had to rub that in, didn't
we
you?
do. We kind of have a nice little rivalry going on that show in terms of kind of teasing each other. But thanks for joining the show. So as I was kind of showing and wanted to touch on it for just a quick second, but like your work in the Robotech universe. I know you had a big part I was a Macross Sega fan, loved it back in the day. Was watching that before Battletech because I was when I was a little kid, and you really had a part in bringing that whole thing back, didn't you?
Yeah. So I was working with the company that picked up the role-playing game license, and they were looking for a Robotech expert who was also a professional writer. And I had a friend in the game industry I'd done some work for who knew I was super into Robotech. In fact, one of my kids, their middle name is Miria. Like I was really
okay.
I like Robotech. I've liked Robotech since again, I was a kid. I was watching those episodes in like 86, 87 on broadcast TV when I was, 5 and 6 or so. And it's something that stuck with me. And they said, well, here's our idea. We'd really like you to do a whole bunch of fiction and short stories in the universe to introduce people to it. So I got to write a lot of in-universe fiction and in-universe nonfiction and short stories, as well as a guide for game masters episode per episode so that they could play the game in the context of the show in every episode and in some other places at the edges of those episodes. And it was just so fun, right? Like it's so fun to sit down and go like, okay, I'm going to write Roy Foker's journal this week about how the SDF-1 landed on Macross Island. Actually that was the one thing that I got pushback from Tommy Yoon. He was like, we think maybe we want to cut this, Roy Foker's journal. We don't think Roy Foker would write a journal. And I was like, in the context of it, the way I wrote up the journal was that, Roy Foker was an ace pilot with the first one with over 100 confirmed kills. And I was like, 100 confirmed kills is going to create some emotional damage to just about anyone, especially someone who came from a pacifist flying circus. Mm-hmm. So it was me actually where Roy didn't want to do it. And, his therapist was making him do it. And so that was him reflecting on this. And then the SDF-1 lands and it's all of a sudden like therapy doesn't matter. I've got to be here on this project. Mm-hmm. So like little character moments like that to help give players like a sense of like how the universe feels at that like that character level view, but to be able to do it as stories and as fiction. So it was a lot of fun. I got to do that for all 3 seasons of the original show in those first 2 books. And I don't think people realize, actually, one of the resources I really leaned on for advice and help was Jim Lucino, who wrote like Plagueis and the Catalyst, the Rogue One tie-in novel. I don't think people realize that he was half of the duo Jack McKinney that wrote all of the Robotech novelizations, and it was him and Brian Daley that split those up and wrote those together. And Brian Daley, Star Wars fans would recognize as the Han Solo adventures and the NPR radio dramas. And and Brian Daley's passed away, but Jim Lucino is still around. And Jim, we had done a bunch of interviews on the podcast, and we'd sort of developed a friendly relationship. And he actually, it was funny. The first time I interviewed him, I didn't think he knew who I was from Adam. And we got 3/4 of the episode through the episode, and he goes, "Now I want to ask you some questions." And I'm like, "What?" And he just like pulled out a whole bunch of questions about Lost at the Con, like in infinite detail. And so we talked about that, and we sort of became friends over that. And like Jim is sort of in retirement now, just living on a boat somewhere. But no, he was really helpful in helping me navigate how they did that. And the way they wrote those novelizations the way he described it to me felt a lot like how I had to write that Big Bang Theory book, where like they gave him VHS copies of those Robotech books, and they said like, "Okay, here's how we're splitting up the story. Here's your tapes. Here's my tapes. And we'll cram 3 episodes into a book each, and we've got to both get them done in a month," or whatever it was. It was just so fast for these novels. And I tried to get him to come back to write one, and he's like, "I've got one Robotech story left in me, and it's a full novel, and they'll never let me tell it. So it's yours now." But no, it was a lot of fun. I was working on a Star Wars project that I still can't talk about at the same time as that. And so I was spending 2 hours working on Robotech and then 2 hours working on Star Wars. And I was just like, 8-year-old me would not believe that I am like working on Robotech, and I'm disappointed I've got to stop working on Robotech to work on Star Wars. And I'm disappointed to stop working on Star Wars to go work on Robotech. And that was a really fun year. I worked on those at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I could totally see that. So K Vesak 123, it's past 3 a.m. So must be over in England across the pond. So yes, sir. Thanks for joining us tonight. Appreciate you having you on. And you can definitely catch the replay on this on Facebook, X, and YouTube. So definitely check that out. And the audio version will be up in a few days. But thanks for joining us tonight. Scruff, you had that one. There was that one Robotech comment, which from Max Rebo Experience, Roy and Claudia relationship was very progressive for the time. And yeah, he's right about that for sure. So I was gonna. You were talking, reminded me when you were talking way back at the beginning of the episode about the licensing with Harmony Gold and everything, and how some people are using the designs for other purposes. Yeah. And I dug this up while we were talking, and well, you guys were talking about the Big Bang book theory, and I have these in storage somewhere. I know I have them, and I don't know how I came across them. I got them off the rack when they came out somehow. And this is a completely different story. It's nothing related to Battletech. But using Battletech design, what I got to know is Battletech designs, and because you got a Battle Master there, and I think what is that, a Thunderbolt, and it was very interesting, and it's a whole mini series of comics that DC did, I think, when probably the licensing was all swirling around.
Yeah, that licensing was really weird. Like, I know the folks who a couple months ago I got to sit down and have a chat with Jordan Wiseman, who was like the creator of Battletech. And he was talking about how like he licensed all of those things like officially. Like he went to the company in Japan and they had all these surplus minis that they were just going to trash. And so he was like, "Can I license them to buy them and put them in these box sets?" And they did it all above board, but it was like sort of the left hand not knowing what the right hand was doing, and the company made this other deal with Harmony Gold, and so it was all just legal trouble for a while, and it's all sorted out now. But yeah, it was just a huge tangle.
Yeah. And it was so weird to see the different designs, because you had the designs from Robotech crossing over into Battletech, and it was from the Marauder to the main fighters themselves, and becoming the Phoenix and everything, and it was just, yeah, it was a real fun time back then, watching, not really quite understanding the whole licensing thing. None of us understood it at that time. We were a little on the young side, but definitely fun. So I wanted to kind of move over, unless you had something to say. I'm sorry, did I cut? Okay, all right. Cut over into something I know Scruffy and I both we got copies of, and you just mentioned it a moment ago, which was Lost at the Con, and absolutely love this book. And anyone that has ever, if you're a con regular, if you've gone to cons, if you've been thinking about, well, maybe not if you've been thinking about going to cons, and
or if you just drove by one and went, what the heck?
Right. So what was you wrote this book a while back, and what?
Yeah.
So where did this story come from?
This was my first published novel back in 2011. And I was covering a lot of cons as a journalist, because I was already writing about Star Wars as a journalist at that point. And I had a lot of experience at cons before that, because I owned a comic book store for a few years. So I would go to like San Diego Comic-Con. I think I've been to like 17 San Diego Comic-Cons.
Nice.
And so like I knew how cons worked. And right after my first Dragon Con, I don't know how many people are familiar with Dragon Con. Dragon Con's sort of my favorite con every year. It's held in Atlanta every Labor Day weekend, and it is unlike any other con. It is very much, I'd heard people describe it as like sort of like nerd Mardi Gras. It is a costume party with alcohol and whatever other substances people have roaming around in their rooms like 24/7. And I'd never been to a con like this before, because there's no like conference center. It's just there's like 4 interconnected hotels, and it's just this big hotel party. And the hotels all have convention space inside of them, but the lobbies are really where people show up off their costumes. And it's just this giant party, like wall to wall people, a giant party, and everybody's in cosplay for the most part. And I was there were a lot of experiences I had that got copied into the book that were like right out of like experiences I had at these cons. And I was like, what would somebody like Hunter S. Thompson think about all this? Like, what would happen if like Hunter S. Thompson got charged with covering Dragon Con like it was the Mint 400? And I wrote the book really fast, and I was trying to get it published. And it was Mike Stackpole, actually, who was just like, I'll tell you why you're not having any luck getting it published. It's because no one knows where to put this on a shelf. It's very niche. So you're not going to have any luck with an agent or an editor. But Mike at that time was putting together like a writer's program at Origins Game Fair, which is the Game Manufacturers Association, their conference. And he was like, if you can get it put out, if you can put it out yourself between now and when this conference is, and you can get it printed, I'll give you a table. Like, I need competent adults at this thing, which is not what I'm getting so far. So Mike was like, the thing about this book is that like, they don't know how to sell it, but you do. You're going to go to these conferences, you're going to go to these conventions, and it's the target audience. And he was absolutely right. And I sold a ton of them. But my first conference there, he put me at a table between him and Timothy Zahn. So that was the first time I'd met Tim. And I can't tell you how demoralizing it is to be at a table between Mike Stackpole and Timothy Zahn with your first book at your first show, and just sort of sitting there going like, yep, Tim's got a line. Yep, Mike's got a line. I'm here too, guys, and nothing. And so I was just hanging out with the two of them. And I did that show for many years. and got to know Tim really well, and Aaron Alston was a staple at that show as well. And then Aaron actually sort of, I got dragged into not dragged into, I was very willing to go, but into a writing critique group that Aaron was sort of, Aaron Alston, who wrote the Race Squadron books and a ton of Star Wars books. He picked me up for this writing critique group that got held once a year back east, and really taught me the ropes. And so the next few books I did came out with a small publisher, like a small indie publisher, and I was doing much better with that. And Aaron just really was a great mentor until his passing. Yeah, that show, like I said, like every good thing in my life happened, in somewhat roundabout way because of Star Wars. But so yeah, getting to hang out at that con with Tim, Mike, and Aaron every year after year after year, was just one of the best experiences. And the three of them really showed me how professional writers treat each other, how they treat fans, and like just really instilled in me, like through osmosis, I guess, just sort of a really great work and professional ethic that really patterned for me like what I think writers in those situations should be. But Lost at the Con made its premiere at that show, and I mean, I sold a bunch of copies, but nowhere, you've got Tim going like, I guess we need to pull out another suitcase of books because we're out. Because Tim cannot bring enough books to a con no matter what. In fact, when he comes to cons here in Salt Lake City, he'll get a hold of me and go, can we ship a bunch of stuff to you in advance, because we don't want to take it on the plane and stuff like that. Because anything Tim can bring to put his signature on it, he can sell at a con.
Oh,
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And Mike's very much the same way too. I mean, Mike still has this like secret stash of first edition iJedi hardcovers. He brings, a few to cons here and there. And, it's amazing when they're still around after a day,
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we got to meet Tim a couple of years ago at one of the conventions, and it was really cool because he was actually out on the main floor, main convention floor, and we turned a corner and there he was, and we happened to catch him in a moment where there was no lines, no nothing. We spent like 10-15 minutes with him. Nice guy, totally nice guy. Got our picture taken and everything, and autographed our books for us, and yeah, super nice guy. But yeah, how intimidating that must have been, that first show, but so rewarding. I mean, look at where you've come from since then.
No, it's definitely, I mean, like I think I've got 8 or 9 published books now, and half of them are in the Battletech universe. And again, that was Mike going, really going to the Battletech guys and saying like, I don't think you realize it or know it, but Bryan is going to be really good at this. You should get him in on this. And we spent actually a couple of years working back and forth trying to pitch stories until I finally got the assignment for Honors Gauntlet, which was actually another funny story because they had a creative summit for the writers, and I was not privy to this summit. And they had scheduled out books that they wanted written for the next couple of years. And after the summit, I get a call from Mike saying like, okay, the great news is I got you on the schedule for a book. And this was going to be my first Battletech work ever. And I'm like, oh, great. You said that was the good news. Like, typically with you, that means another shoe is going to fall. And again, it was the same thing like with the Big Bang Theory. He's like, yeah, but you're first on the schedule. And you need to have this book done in like 3 months. And I was like, okay. And he's like, how much do you know about the Jade Falcons? And at this point, all of the stories that they'd been asking me to pitch were for a different era with different factions that didn't intersect with the Jade Falcons at all. But this summit was them going, we're going to move into this next era finally, instead of like 20 years before where we're at now. So literally 0% of my Battletech knowledge or research was in the Jade Falcons. And so all of a sudden I had 3 months to, I mean, it got extended a little bit, but I had just a few months to prepare and read as much Jade Falcon material as I could to, understand enough about them to create this book with obviously a lot of the guidance that they had. And people were happy enough with it that they were like, oh, Mike was right, I guess. We should have him do some more. And it's very rare since that time I haven't been in the middle of at least one Battletech project. So it's been a lot of fun doing that. But yeah, it was terrifying, that first call, because Mike is just sort of coaching me on like, here's all the notes from the story summit, and I'm just writing furiously down, and I'm like, what? I don't know anything about the Jade Falcons yet. It's like, you'll be fine. It'll be fine. Here's the books you need to read. And then, I just right in the deep end, whether that's Big Bang Theory or Battletech or whatever, like I've thrived kind of just getting tossed in.
Yeah. Max Rebo experience. I'm always stumping for Mike to get a Canon Rogue Squadron book.
So are we all.
Yeah.
No, I know. When the Rogue Squadron movie was announced, like he and Patty Jenkins talked a little bit on Twitter, and that was exciting. And I hope that when that movie's still in development, and they brought her back after the Wonder Woman movie got canceled to continue development. It's not in as active development as it was initially, but I hope they get her to make that movie, and I hope they get Mike involved, and I hope that he gets to write a book, and I hope that more than anything, he gets a cameo just so he can sign Star Wars autographs of himself for the rest of his life.
Right on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Zahn found success, bringing the new Thrawn novels into canon, and I love them. I've read all 6 of them, and they're great books. And
I think his 6 Thrawn books are the best Thrawn books he's ever written. Like, I think they're hands down. Like, I love the Heir to the Empire trilogy. Don't get me wrong. I was there like day one reading them.
Yep.
But like these new Thrawn books are just like, he's a master of his craft now in a way he wasn't then.
Yeah.
And the way they intertwine with the rest of the canon in a way that those never could, especially as you got further away from them, they're just, they're terrific.
Yeah.
They're really good.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm sure Mike could do just a bang up job with a new canon Rogue Squadron as well. And especially if they timed it and worked Carson Teva into it, I'd be a fan of that. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, who doesn't love that guy?
Absolutely.
So catching up on the chat just a little bit. So Max Rebo earlier, Ravel made amazing Robotech Defender models, and he's absolutely right. And thank you for reminding us of those, because I didn't have any of them. I didn't have the patience for models, but definitely remember those. And then latest comment was Aiden Pride.
Yeah, I read all of those Aiden Pride books. Those were the Jade Phoenix trilogy. Really like I Am Jade Falcon and those books from those early eras. And it was actually really interesting reading those really early books of the Jade Falcons and going like, they're getting away with stuff that I could not get away with today, just because of the way Battletech storytelling has evolved. It was interesting to see what they could get away with and what they couldn't get away with, but those were terrific stories. And it was interesting. I had to write a short story that intertwined with Aiden Pride's story. There's an anthology called The Battle of Tukayd, which was sort of the clan's initial sort of invasion and that battle of a trial to see if they would have to stop. And they did an anthology where they took the perspective of one story from each clan and their fight there. And obviously I got the Jade Falcon story and sort of telling stuff tangential to Aiden Pride's version of that story was a lot of fun.
That's very cool. So quick question still in the Battletech universe, and we'll start to wrap this up because we really appreciate you spending all this time with us. In the Battletech universe, is there a particular group, character, clan, house that you would love to write?
There's a lot of stuff. I would really like to write the Word of Blake, to be honest. So the Word of Blake, how do I explain this quickly? So basically, Battletech was sort of conceived as this medieval sort of, political house battle. And Comstar was this organization that was basically like, a lot of people sort of jokingly call them the phone company, but they controlled communication in the galaxy. And they were sort of this symbol for like the way the church operated, sort of putting their thumb on the scales back in that time. And they had this very hyper radical sect called the Word of Blake. and they sort of launched what they called, they launched this sort of war on the galaxy, and it was this really undernourished point in the timeline. There's not a whole lot of stories told there. There's really not any novels told there. And for the first couple of years, I was working on Battletech, is that's where they had me trying to tell stories. But nothing got approved because they just didn't know where they were taking the universe next. And then as soon as they pivoted and said, we're moving into this new era, all of those pitches were like, well, we'll think about those later. And so I've got tons of ideas of what to do in that era. And now that they've established the new era, it seems like if I'm not too busy writing stuff in the current era at the very edge of the timeline, I'll get to go back and write some of that stuff in that era and write the Word of Blake. I do have one story that involves them that I'm really excited about. There's a collection coming that was a Kickstarter bonus about the bounty hunter, which is sort of this notorious character in Battletech, and I got to write a Word of Blake story in there, and it was just really fun, and I hope to get to do more of them. But yeah, Word of Blake.
Yeah, very cool. Very great answer. Great answer. Yeah, definitely a faction or a group that you don't really focus on, or the whole universe doesn't really focus on very much, because you're right. Yeah, that's kind of how we always thought of them. They're just a telephone company.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about Word of Blake is that they're these mustache twirling villains, but they controlled so many worlds, and people sort of believed all the propaganda. And I really am fascinated in what it would take to tell stories from people who are very true believers, but because they bought into all the propaganda, and how they actually brought people into their side. I think that's really interesting. And I love stories like that in Star Wars. I love stories like that. I don't know, just like, I don't know. I like stories, and Star Wars and Battletech seem to be the places that I get most excited about them.
Right. So bounty hunters, Boba Fett adjacent.
Yeah.
Yep, a lot of parallels, right? So one other question about Lost in the Con. Steampunk Abraham Lincoln.
Yes. There, finally, thank you.
Okay, so Steampunk Abraham Lincoln was actually like a guy in a costume at Dragon Con one year, and it was actually the situation in the elevator. I didn't actually write it as it had happened to me in person, because it would be too unbelievable. But I'm standing in an elevator, and I don't quite notice who it is that's standing next to me in the elevator, and the doors open like halfway down the tower, and there's this steampunk Abraham Lincoln who walks in, and he has to like duck to get into the elevator, and the elevator's so packed that we all have to like sort of contract into each other, and I realize I'm belly to belly with Sylvester McCoy, and all I can think to say is like, doctor, right? Like, what else do you say to Sylvester McCoy? This was before The Hobbit, so it wasn't like we knew Radagast the Brown. I mean, he was just the doctor at that point.
Right.
And here I am sharing this really way too intimate moment for no reason with the doctor, because steampunk Lincoln smashed us in the back of an elevator. And I was so taken and so struck by that image as I was writing the book. I was just like, it would be so fun to do this. And there's so much symbolism in the idea that like of what Lincoln represents and what sort of like steampunk represented at the time when I was writing the book, and how I thought it could function narratively, that it was just an image that was burned in my brain, right? There are so many things in that book that really do come straight out of experiences I had at cons.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And Steampunk Lincoln was one of them. And I didn't try to put the thing with Sylvester McCoy in there because I really just didn't think people would believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it would feel too convenient, right? And those things happen at those cons that have those levels of coincidence that feel very realistic. But you know, it was Mark Twain who said that like truth is allowed to be stranger than fiction because fiction has to be believable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good quote. Yeah, and you're right. At cons, So one of the cons we go to, we were at the same hotel as a lot of the celebrity guests were staying. And so just walking down the hallway and, oh, there's General Veers just walking down the hallway, and it was just, we had a lot of sightings at that con, didn't we, Scruff? And it was just, helping Jeffrey Cantor find an ice bucket because he's panicking, running around the hotel looking for an ice bucket, and it just, crazy stuff that happens that you just wouldn't believe. And
So I never would have believed steampunk Abraham Lincoln was real, though. I thought he made it up.
There's little things too, like Richard Hatch, who played Starbuck on Battlestar Galactica. There's a moment in the book where Cobb kind of goes to that party, and there's a guy playing billiards in the back of the party. At Dragon Con, every year at that media party, it was Richard Hatch in the back there, like playing billiards, and it was like he would just hang out and shoot pool at the media party every year without fail. And when he died, going up to the media party that year, I was like, I don't know what to expect now. Is this going, like, what is this going to be like? And, walking back there, and it was like the pool table and the bar, and there was just this picture of Richard there, like, but to honor him and stuff, but getting to include those little details that you wouldn't even like expect or know, because it's sort of a little bit behind the scenes about how those cons work. It was a lot of fun to just sort of try to compile a lot of those stories. And I've talked, like, a couple of people have talked to me about, like, well, are you ever going to write a sequel? And like, I've got some ideas for one, but I don't know if I'll ever sit down and write it. But like, having been to so many cons now as a writer, right, that really came out of my experience as someone, as a journalist covering it. And at the end of the book, it really is about Cobb sort of realizing that this isn't the life he wants, and he's got something else aspirationally. And I thought, like, what if he wrote a sci-fi novel and started going to cons as a writer and as a guest, and what that looks like, because it's a totally different experience. And I could sort of compile some of those experiences in there, but I don't know if I'll ever get down to writing it.
Right.
I would love to read that book.
That would be great. And when you made the Hunter S. Thompson, that put it all together, and I was like, because that's exactly now. I totally see Cobb in that light now. Bryan, we've really enjoyed having you on. I wanted to throw this up on the screen really quick because there's just so much more. And we're gonna have to have you back. I mean, it's just, without a doubt, we're just gonna have to have you back because there's just so much we can talk about. I keep going and going and going and going and going, and even just on the Star Wars alone, because you do a lot of great work over there. Which one other part on Lost in the Con, his whole interaction with the 501st guys cracked me up to no end, and making the comparisons to the Nazi brown shirts, and that whole conversation was just because I love to troll every once in a while, just to just get people's hackles up just for fun, take the contrary argument, and that just I laughed so hard at that.
And it's not, I mean, like, I love the 501st. I'm honorary in that organization, and in fact, the reason I went to my first Dragon Con is because they were inducting me into the 501st as an honorary friend because of my Star Wars work. So it was definitely not a slight on them, but I did get caught in that party Vader, like in the book that year too. It was, the interactions with all the various sorts of people at the cons, and the different groups and the different sort of traditions. It's bizarre how much each con has a different personality, and they each have sort of these different cults of culture that grow out of just that individual little con, and it's bizarre.
I've heard of Dragon Con. I've heard it's pretty awesome, but now I think we need to make a trip down there one of these years.
Even almost 15 years on, Lost to the Con feels like a very accurate representation of what Dragon Con feels like. And I hear that a lot.
Right.
That's awesome.
No, absolutely love that book. So like I said, Bryan, it's been a joy having you on. It really is. We definitely got to have you back on. We got to talk more Star Wars and get back to that angle of things. Something people may not know is that you do a lot of writing for the Star Wars cards.
No, I write a huge chunk of the Star Wars trading cards. If you look on my website, you can see which card sets I've worked on pretty heavily, either entirely by myself or in tandem with a couple of other writers. And I'm not allowed with my contracts to say which sets I've worked on until they come out, but suffice to say, there's a whole bunch more coming out that I've written. And it's a lot of fun, and it's challenging in ways that I think is a lot of fun, where you don't necessarily think, hey, I loved those cards when I was a kid, right? And they were such a source of like information for me to learn about Star Wars. So it was always it was a very emotional treat opening up the first pack of Star Wars cards that I wrote. Because you want to give extra context so that people who might not know like one layer further than what's on the screen or in those cards, but you also want to encapsulate what the image is and add to it rather than just describe it. And you have to do it in a very specific character count, right? Like most of those cards run from 250 characters, including spaces, to 550 characters, including spaces. And they want you to hit as close to that as you can. Now, I mean, sometimes, you'll get a card and you're like, oh, I've got to write 550 characters, which is about, 175 words or whatever, about the Reek. Like, what am I going to do for that long? Like, what am I going to do in that way? So you kind of have to find ways to mug for the space a little bit and still be additive and relevant. So
Right.
It's a really interesting challenge in brevity. And I really enjoy it. I really do enjoy it. And it's become a really interesting hobby, collecting, like chasing the cards I've written. I don't even have a complete set of all the cards I've written.
Oh, wow.
Because the economics, like there's a totally different world of Star Wars collecting that I was not aware of that exists in the card trading ecosystem. And there's some card sets I wrote that I literally can't afford to get a set of.
Yeah, that's just difficult for me because I want one of everything, and they made that so difficult to get.
Yeah. No, I mean, I had a lot of luck where I'd buy a few boxes of the ones that I wrote, collect enough cards to like put most of a set together, and then pick up enough rare chase cards to sell them on eBay or in card trading groups to like make my money back, at least, so I'm not losing money on having taken the job in the first place and because I want to like collect all my stuff. But there were definitely some sets. Like there was a set I did 2 years ago. I want to say it was chrome black, and each case, like each box, had 3 or 4 cards in it and an autograph. And I only wrote the first 50 of 100 of that base set of cards. But in order to have collected those, I would have had to spend $10,000 on autograph cards to be able to have enough to trade away. And I've bought a few here or there online, but they're still $8 or $10 a piece. So like, at what point is it worth it having taken the job? Do I really want them? And so with those, I'm sort of waiting for the price to crater down and see if I can pick up a set or something,
Right.
Some of them are easier to get. Like, I did this set for Book of Boba Fett, and like I went to Target and bought a few of the tins, and I had a whole set just out of that. So It was like, it's interesting. The economics of them are really interesting.
Yeah. I've been trying to nudge Scruffy into that arena, but he's resisting.
No, I cannot afford that arena. I can barely keep this under control, and someday,
right.
I'm just hoping and praying that someday it'll be worth half of what I paid for it.
Right.
Why? You're never going to get rid of it.
Right.
Well, see, that was my line to my wife one year, many years ago. I said, well, someday it's going to be worth money.
Yeah.
She stared at me for a minute with this expression on her face that just let me know that no, I'm not pulling this one out. Well, that implies you're going to sell it someday.
Yeah, no, I had the very same conversation with my wife.
Okay, all right.
They know.
They do. They do. We have good wives.
Like, sell it to who?
yeah. Who? Really? Who?
Right. So, Brian, where can people find everything Bryan Young?
If you go to swankmatron.com, You can find all of the info about the books, and there's a shop there, so you can order signed copies of all of my books, including the new one Without Question. And you can find out about me. My bio's there, all the appearances I've got coming up. I do a lot of cons every year, so I love meeting people and talking Star Wars and Battletech, and mainly those two. I mean, like, I'll talk about anything with anybody, but Star Wars mainly is sort of the thing that,
Right.
you know, that old Simpsons joke about Dancing Pete, you know, you gave him a quarter, he'll be doing it for a while. Like, that's me with Star Wars. But
right. So definitely check out Full of Sith, because
yeah,
there's a
and
lot of it there.
the Full of Sith podcast, like I said, if you go to fullofsith.com, you can listen to the entire back catalog of episodes. And we've had everybody on that show, from Dave Filoni repeatedly, Carrie Fisher, Peter Mayhew, Yoda Swadamo, Phil Tippett's been on the show. We just last week we had Matt Martin and Pablo Hidalgo from the Lucasfilm Story team.
Nice.
You know, so Leland Chee's been on the show a bunch. We had Jeremy Bullock on a couple times. Ray Park's been on a couple times. Daniel Logan's been on a couple times. A lot of the voice cast. I will say, like, if you're interested in Star Wars and Mike Stackpole, I swear, like, one of the best hours of programming I've ever had a hand in. And it was recorded at a con that I'd organized the panel. But Mike Stackpole and Bob Salvatore, who wrote the infamous Vector Prime, and we did a whole hour about the decision to kill Chewie and the fallout from killing Chewie in Vector Prime. And it was called Why We Killed Chewie. And it was one of the most amazing hours of just listening to that conversation play out. So that's definitely one. Like, if you're going to listen to like one or two of the episodes, look for that one specifically, because it's just awesome. Terrific.
That's very cool.
But that's at fullofsith.com. And and Swankmatron across all social media.
So where did Swankmatron come from?
Yes, thank you.
One thing I've tried to instill in my kids is that their screen names that they pick for their gaming is going to haunt them for the rest of their life. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, I'm Swankmotron. And they're like, where'd that come from? So it started in probably 1998. And it didn't start as Swankmatron. That came later. But when we learned that Darth was a moniker and not a name, and that Darth Maul was a character in those weeks between the trailer release and them starting to finally put out a little bit more information about Phantom Menace, I was just sort of blown away by this. And I was like, geez, I'd probably just turned 18. And I was playing a lot of networked video games. I was playing tons of StarCraft. I was playing tons of Counter-Strike. I was playing tons of like those sorts of games. And you always needed a screen name. But I was also watching a ton of Simpsons. Like, Simpsons was like, I could mainline Simpsons at that time. There was that episode of Simpsons where it turns out that Principal Skinner wasn't Principal Skinner. He was Armin Tamzarian. And there's the moment where Homer goes into the apartment and asks if he can see Armin's copy of Swank. And I discovered through The Simpsons that Swank was a pornographic magazine. And the funniest thing in the world to me was Darth Swank. Like Darth Porno Mag was the funniest thing for me at 18. And that was my screen name for a while. And, people would call me Swank. Like, it became like a thing that people called me. And then at the top, when you read my bio, you mentioned Big Shiny Robot, which is a website, a nerd news and review website that still exists. And I was the co-founder and the editor-in-chief of that site for 10 years. But the first year of that site, we were really dedicated to being anonymous. We didn't necessarily want, like, for some reason that anonymity felt reasonable, and we all had to pick robot names. And so since Swank was already sort of my handle on everything, I was like, okay, I'll just be Swankmotron because that sounds robotic. And it used to have two dashes. It used to have a dash between Swank and Mo and Tron. So it looked a little bit more robotic. And I wrote 4,000 articles for that website under Bryan Swankmotron Young. And that was like, I didn't really want to get into Twitter, but I did because I was using the Big Shiny Robot Twitter. And I was like, this is my primary outlet. I'll just go with Swankmatron because there's about 9 trillion Bryan Youngs.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, like, I just kept getting followed and I kept doing like viral tweets and like, especially for Star Wars. And it was like, I got verified pretty early on because I was writing for Huffington Post and StarWars.com. And when you got verified in that era, you couldn't change your screen name. You couldn't change your handle. So it was just like, well, I guess I'm Swankmatron for the rest of my life. And then when I went to go get my author website, again, it was one of those things where like BryanYoung.com is taken. Every variation of BryanYoung.com is taken. I had Bryan Young fiction, but it didn't feel right. And so I was just like, screw it. I'll embrace the Swankmotron. And because there's literally, like, I wasn't even the only Bryan Young in elementary school in my class, right? Like, it's just a really common name. So like I literally had years where I was Brian Y1. You know. So yeah, so it was I'm not the other Bryan Youngs, I'm Swankmatron. So that's where it came from. It was
That's funny.
Star Wars related,
Right.
but also Simpsons and a porno magazine and then a robot. So
well,
so
thank you for sharing that.
Thank you so much.
I am
That is
gonna
awesome.
I'm gonna chuckle now every time I listen to Full of Sith and I hear you sign off at the end of the day. So
no, yeah, it's my son, his screen name he picked when he was like 7 or 8 was like the Hickey. And I'm like Anakin, like, you don't want that to be your screen name. Like, your name is Anakin. You could probably pick a cool screen name because I promise you're going to fall into it and you're going to have it the rest of your life. And he is 22 and his screen name on all of everything is still the Hickey.
that
is awesome.
That's hilarious. Okay, so I think we'll skip we did a dad joke of the week last night. I think we're good. We've been running long. So so any cons coming up pretty close that you're gonna be at that people can find you?
The next big one I have is probably gonna be Gen Con in Indianapolis. I'll be at Dragon Con again this year. I'm gonna be at some smaller writers conferences. And then, really, I just kind of go where I'm invited. So things can always pop up in between now and then. I'm looking at maybe WesterCon this year, which is sort of a sci-fi writing convention. But I think Gen Con's the next big one I'm for sure going to.
Okay. All right. Rock on. Well, very cool. So before we do the final sign off, definitely check them out. Check out Full of Sith, check out swankmatron.com. And for being on the show, all of our guests I'm going to give you another name. So all of our guests become honorary members of Brown Squadron. And with that, you get a flight designation and a call sign as being part of the crew. You're welcome back anytime. You got an open invitation to come back on the show. We definitely need to do a whole episode just on Star Wars and go from there. But so for now on, you are in the canon annals of Brown Squadron as Brown 54 Carnelian. And where that comes from is Carnelian. I always try to find something that relates to the guest. Carnelian 4 is a planet in Star Wars, and it's in the comics. And they are a planet with 2 factions fighting, the open and the closed. And the open use mech to fight with. And so that was kind of the tie-in to that call sign. So
it's interesting. I've actually got a planet in Star Wars named after me.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, Young Bry from the Poe Dameron Freefall book.
Oh wow.
Oh, very cool. Very cool.
Awesome.
That's very cool. But yeah, like I said, Bryan, you're welcome back anytime. We'd love to have you. Definitely talk Star Wars. Everybody definitely check out all of his stuff. And for Hyperspace Heroes, make sure that you follow us on social. You can get a hold of us at brownsquadron@gmail.com. DM us on all our socials. You can find us here on X, Facebook, and Twitter. And so with that, I think we're going to get out of here tonight, guys. Again, Bryan, thank you for being on.
Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is Brown Leaders signing off for the crew. And you have been listening and watching Hyperspace Heroes. That's no moon.
Was it good for you?